Yes, sir. And Nick, I will just housekeeping wise, we have until 12:45. I'll try to give you about a 5-minute warning just in case. And if there are any questions, I'll try to hold them until the end. Nick, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everybody. Nick,
Great. No, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank my fellow presenters for their flexibility. I had a lot of challenges getting down to LA this morning. And so being able to kind of move things around at the last minute, I really appreciate it. And the EVOTEK team as well. So thanks for that. Um, Excited to talk about kind of where Cribl sees the future of the data center. Our view is that this shift from monitoring to observability is really changing a lot of things. And in our case, we think it changes everything. My name's Nick Heudecker. I run market strategy at Cribl. Prior to Cribl, I was an analyst at Gartner for a number of years covering data and analytics. I'm feeling much better now and really enjoying the ride here at Cribl. I feel like my fellow presenters and Phil earlier really set me up pretty well because they're very data centric, and this is really a problem that Cribl addresses in a unique way. If you're not familiar with Cribl, we consider ourselves to be the company for observability pipelines, and I'll talk a bit about what that means. But first, I want to talk about the company a little bit here. Um, we are purpose built for this mountain of monitoring and observability data that is coming out of all kinds of sources today. And this plays in well to the future of the data center story because the data center is everywhere now, right? It's not even the data center. It's where is there a center of data? And that's where the applications will go. How can I better serve my customers? And so the challenge that Cribl saw was that companies have all of this monitoring observability data, but they can't get a lot of value from it. And our story here with Logstream, our observability pipeline product, has resonated quite well. As you can see in our financials, we're growing at 300% a year. I think that number's higher now. We recently closed a $200 million round with some great VC partners, and we count over 80 Fortune 1000 customers in our cohort. Also, our community is growing quite quickly. We're about 170 people right now, but we have a community on Slack that's almost 2,600 people today. So people are really, this idea of being able to do more with this data is resonating quite well. Our founders, largely ex-Splunk, have quite a bit of experience in this space, and we've really built out a fantastic product and a go-to-market machine. We really consider ourselves to be a leader in this nascent space of observability. Even though I live in it, it feels like we're kind of in the third inning right now. The reality is most companies don't know what observability is, and we're still kind of in batting practice, not even the first inning yet. Some of the companies you can see: FINRA, TransUnion, Autodesk, JPL, Shutterfly. Some of the companies we can mention publicly. We have many more. I wish I could. But that's kind of that's life in the big city, right? When you're working with new customers as a smaller vendor. So let's talk about kind of where Cribl sees this future of the data center concept going. Phil talked about this earlier in his introduction. March of 2020, the story for businesses was, how do I stay in the game, right? How do I survive? And the way that a lot of companies did that was they shifted to digital channels much faster than they thought they ever could. And that worked, right? That worked really well. And it helped, bridge gaps in everything from healthcare to education to how you interact with your family. And now that has actually opened up borders, whereas before, like you would go to a healthcare provider in your town, or in your city somewhere. Maybe you drive for specialist care. But today there's global competition, right? Because everyone has these digital channels, and it's becoming more and more difficult to differentiate yourselves, and performance matters, right? And it's becoming increasingly important that if your service is not performing up to par, people are going to run. They're going to find a service that works better. And it's becoming increasingly more challenging to figure out, well, where is the problem? And so you're seeing companies rethink this, right? Now that things are opening back up again. I'm back on the road for the first time in more months than I care to remember. Now companies are starting to think, all right, well, The leaders in these spaces are saying, well, now it's time to go hybrid. And the data center is going to be at the edge, and the data center is going to be in the cloud, and perhaps multiple clouds. This mixture of hybrid physical and digital experiences. McKinsey has kind of a clumsy term for it, phygital, which is fun to say, but it's hard to kind of understand what it means. You're seeing much more of this blending of physical and digital in a variety of different delivery patterns. And so, what does this do? This really drives up complication, right? If you look at where people are deploying applications today, right, it's not just on-prem, it's not just in the cloud, it's all of it, right? 68% of applications are being deployed everywhere. And as they're using more and more modern technologies and microservices and containers, today's average application uses dozens of different technologies. So trying to get an idea of what's going wrong, right? Why is performance suffering? Was it the latest commit? Did someone simply change a setting from info to debug and now we're getting buried with new data? Some of it may contain PII information. So it's incredibly difficult to get visibility into what's happening in these modern application environments, right? You might try and think, well, I'm going to use traditional monitoring for this, right? I'm paying a lot of money for all of these things. I've deployed hundreds of thousands of agents all over the place, but the data is still pretty locked into those individual platforms. And when we talk to prospects and customers, 54% of organizations say they're using 8 or more. When I show this to people, they typically laugh. They're like, I wish I only had 8 monitoring tools. Typically, they're dealing with 30, right? And that's not a knock on CISOs or CIOs. These things grow organically. You may have acquired a company and you inherit their monitoring environment. There might be a sudden need to monitor containers. And so you go out and you acquire a new tool for that. Once that tool gets integrated into the processes and how you work, it's very difficult to get rid of it. It's incredibly challenging to take data from, say, one agent and share it to another. And the idea, like there's been a lot of talk lately around, well, we want to shift left, right? We want to move the performance testing and the security testing left to development. And so you'll hear about DevSecOps. It seems like whenever there's a challenge in IT, we want to either insinuate more things into DevOps or prepend them, right? I've even seen BizDevSecOps. I don't know what that is, but this idea that, well, we're gonna have developers do this, it's just simply too expensive to have your developers spend their time on security audits. And so what you see is this kind of bifurcation of where does responsibility lie in a lot of organizations. Your DevOps teams, they get to decide when applications get released, but your security operations teams are actually responsible for any breaches that may occur from those applications. And so you've got your developers that are incentivized to develop things quickly, right? They're incentivized for feature velocity. And you've got your SecOps teams that are incentivized to mitigate risk. And so getting an idea of, well, across all of these different monitoring tools, how do I know what's happening, right? No one's talking to each other. It's very difficult to figure out, what the path of an application is, and trying to make sense of increasingly terse monitoring messages. I was a developer, right? I think my most common log message when I was writing code was, it worked here. And then the rest of it, you just don't know. And so our view is that as the data center shifts into more kind of an amorphous shape, monitoring has kind of let us down, right? It's very single system focused. That's been one of the major challenges. And I'm an old database person, and I think of monitoring as like a data warehouse, right? Where you've got to take the data that you've got, you shape it for the questions you want to ask. And that's great if you're dealing with one big monolithic system with a very small technology stack. But the reality is quite different, right? And so we're seeing this big driver for being able to explore data sets, right? Going from a data warehousing model to more of a data lake style model, where it is much more exploratory. Monitoring is typically very expensive, so it forces you to exclude things by default. Observability says, give me all of it, but let me organize it. Let me govern what's there. And as I've mentioned, monitoring very much single system performance focus. That's not the reality anymore, right? Even if you're deploying an application, just in one location, it's going to use multiple containers, multiple microservices, multiple databases. So you've got to have much more of a distributed systems focus. Most containers last less than 24 hours today. So by the time you've actually detected a problem, the container's gone and much of the data is also missing as well. Um, and the story for monitoring has always been we have to reduce the amount of data that we're ingesting. This could be a cost factor, right? You might be charged based on how much data you're ingesting. You might be struggling with infrastructure, right? I just don't have the storage to deal with this. And observability says, well, let's take that stuff and give you an option, right? Let's create an options-based strategy around all of this data. And also, the story for observability is very much around governance and around compliance, right? Being able to enrich things on the way in, so you know what regulatory regime a given data set falls under. And so these are all drivers for where observability is going and why the shift from monitoring has been so abrupt over the last year. It's largely been driven by the pandemic response. So, where does Cribl fit, right? Or what does this look like? What does the old world look like? What does the new world look like? This is a representation, right? This is not a perfect representation of what a monitoring environment looks like today, but it gets the message across, right? The old saying, right? All models are wrong, some are useful, but I think this provides some good color. In a lot of enterprises that are still very much on-prem today, you may have 100,000, 200,000 servers, each running one or more agents, usually more than one. Or they may have data sources that you want to go collect from. And so you might have a processor that goes and fetches that stuff, maybe tails a log, and then sends that onto a downstream system. Well, the problem is that you're locked into that one downstream system, right? That one agent is sending data to one place. And so if you do have rules around, well, I want to redact PII data, you have to figure out how to replicate that rule across hundreds of thousands of different agents. And every time there's a new agent that you want to deploy, maybe for a new security tool, you've got to deploy those agents as well. And so that slows down your deployment of a new tool. It increases overhead on the destination systems, and it still creates yet another data silo that you have to deal with, right? There is no single source of truth because every system has its own truth, right? Truth becomes very contextual in this world. All the data sources become very contextual as well. You don't have a lot of control. You also don't have control over data volumes as well, because the story for a lot of these destinations is land it here first and then make a decision about how you want to manage that data, how you want to cope with that data, and so on. And so when we talk to our prospects and customers about their challenges with this, all of this resonates. They don't want to deploy more agents. They don't want to have to deal with ingest-based pricing or volume or event-based pricing as well. That's another challenge. They want to be able to do more with the data that they already have. And so basically the story is that we tell that seem to resonate pretty well is, let's centralize things, right? We go from a decentralized world, now we're talking about much more centralization, because you can do more with the things that you already have. You need a strategic control layer that allows you to centralize your ingestion rules. It allows you to centralize how you process data, how you remove, say, null values even. If you've looked at things like Windows XML logs, they're incredibly chatty, right? They're incredibly voluminous and not a lot of value in all of that extra volume. So being able to strip that noisy data out and just collect it once instead of multiple times, and then distribute that, right? Separating your systems from analysis from your systems of record, and being able to distribute that data in the target destination format is where we see ourselves fitting in this world today. So I would always get questions from my clients when I was an analyst about, I need a single source of truth. You're just not going to have a single pane of glass for this. You're just not, right? The reality is you're still going to have multiple dashboards. But with a story like an observability pipeline, you can at least have shared context across all of those tools, across all of those data sources. So you don't need to deploy new agents if you want to take better advantage of the data that you already have flowing in. One story is from one of our customers. They wanted to deploy a new SIEM product, but they didn't want to deploy the agents, as I've kind of highlighted. And we said, that's fine, right? We can take the data that you already have from existing agents, and we can send that to the destination platform in that data format. And so what would have been a months-long deployment turned into a couple weeks of just setting up the destination and routing data to it. And so our product in this story is our observability pipeline. It's called LogStream. And so what LogStream does is it provides a strategic layer between the inputs or sources of observability data, right? Whether that's syslog, whether that's Kafka, Splunk, Elastic Beats, Fluent D agents, you name it. And so any kind of, also we have collectors that will go out and pull in log data and so on. And it provides a single place for you to think about, well, how do I want to route that data to multiple destinations? Are there things I want to reduce, right? I talked about Windows XML logs, but there's a lot of chatty logs out there where you don't necessarily need all of that information going downstream. And this also allows you to kind of optimize performance downstream, because if you're not filling those, let's say, search indexes with a lot of extra information, those downstream systems perform better because their indexes are tighter effectively. And are there transformations that you want to make? We support enrichments like GeoIP. So if you want to know, well, did this come from a GDPR country? Should I apply CCPA, for instance, to these data sources? It allows you to kind of enrich those data sources on the way to their destinations so you can get more value from them. Another story that we have is one of our customers wanted to start tracking all of their DNS data, which would have been a couple terabytes a day in extra logging requirements. But the reality is that very few hosts are compromised. And so we have an enrichment process that says, well, if this domain is in the top 2,000 global domains, drop it, right? There's a very small probability that domain is compromised. So what would have been multiple terabytes a day turned into 50 gigabytes a day. And that 50 gigabytes was far more valuable than the multiple terabytes. But the story is always about what options can you preserve, right? How do I build this options-based observability strategy? And so we also allow you to take that data and spin it off into low-cost object storage, like an S3, like an Azure Blob Store. And so if you decide, all right, well, I detected a signal in one of my security tools, right? Maybe you're doing threat hunting, and you say, well, there's more data out there that I want to bring in. You can take that data, you can go back to your offline store and replay that back through LogStream and maybe do another round of enrichment, another round of filtering, and then send that data either to the same or a different platform. So you don't have to decide everything up front, right? You're not making choices, you're preserving options. And so when we talk to our customers about what LogStream does for them, we generally hear 5 things, right? We eliminate vendor lock-in, right? Because we sit in the middle, we're agnostic between the sources and destinations of this data. You can do anything you want with it, right? If you decide, well, I'm going to shift from one strategic platform to another strategic platform, you can route that data wherever you'd like it to go. Another interesting attribute of this is if you want to do an upgrade, right? If you say you want to upgrade from one version of a time series database to a new version of the same database, you can route that. You can split the data and route it to both places at once. Once you're satisfied with either the performance or the compatibility of that new version, you can then cut the old version off, and you're off and running on the new version. So it insulates you from a lot of vendor challenges that you typically encounter either in a monitoring or an observability space. It also simplifies your data engineering, right? It's easy for I think engineering departments to look at the monitoring story and say, well, I'll just build that, right? There's lots of open source stuff out there. I'm content to build it. What I always say about this is engineers love a wedding, they hate a marriage. right? They don't want to live with it. They don't have a story for day two. And companies are typically dealing with hundreds of different logging formats that can change at any time. So being able to build out all of those capabilities and all that flexibility around ingesting different data formats is often staff prohibitive, cost prohibitive. And so being able to easily get data in from multiple sources and send it to multiple destinations with the functionality that enterprises expect, right? Role-based access control, redacting private fields, things like that. Those are things that are very difficult to build for an engineering team that don't specialize in observability data. And also it's the control, right? Companies, they want to do more with this data, and that means having much more control over it. It also allows you to think about, well, I can take a much more component-based story, right? I get a little more leverage over my traditional vendors because I'm not locked into them like I used to be. So much more control over the data, how you choose to manage it, how you choose to cost optimize it. And so the end result is you get to observe more, right? Because you can make better decisions about how you run your monitoring story, how you build your observability story. So your downstream systems are much more optimized. And you're also preserving all of those options around what you want to do with data in the future. And you also get to pay less, which is kind of nice. This is something that, there are teams of people that go around and try and cut costs on everything from databases to monitoring infrastructure. And so even in just a few hours of working with some of our packs, which are pre-built functionality that you can install, you can radically cut the amount of data that you're ingesting into downstream systems or into destination systems, and also spin all of that raw data off to a lower cost platform. So if you decide later on, yeah, I've got a regulatory concern I need to do some reporting on, or I want to rerun this data for a security concern, you have that option for you today. So what are the benefits of this observability pipeline story, right? Talking about data centers shifting quite a bit. It is no longer like the thing you point to. The data centers everywhere. Wherever people are interacting with your product, you are going to, and it's going to be a digital experience, you're going to push that application to where the user touch point is for the best performance because the risks are too high, right? That's a brand touch point. So the best of a more robust observability story with an observability pipeline, you get to use your existing stuff, right? You're not introducing more overhead. You're taking advantage of what is there and you're optimizing it. So you get to use your existing monitoring and observability sources. You get an incredibly flexible way to manage these data sources, and it's very simple. You look at alternatives to doing this, and it's a bunch of configuration files that you're pushing around, or maybe pushing down to agents. Our interface is very much driven by the operator, right? We have a great deal of empathy for the operators that we work with, and so you get flexibility, simplicity, and control over all of that observability data that you're dealing with. And there's going to be more coming in the future. The forecast today is by 2025, companies will be dealing with 250% more data than they did in 2020. IDC's latest estimates are that 64 zettabytes of data was actually created in 2020, but only 2% of that data was actually stored because there's just not enough storage capacity. So you have to be able to make better decisions over this mountain of data. And then lastly, you get to discover and share new insights, right? Your security operations teams and your IT operations teams are all trying to figure it out, right? They all have their own pressures, but they do remarkably similar things over similar data sets. And so being able to share those insights across teams without having to compromise are some of the best benefits that we see from our customers as well. Data goes from kind of this thing that we have to say no to all the time, right? We just don't have the capacity, we don't have the budget. Now you get to say yes. Some of the companies that are currently working with us, TransUnion, Autodesk, there's a number of others. We're experiencing pretty massive growth at this point. Blue Voyant, one of our partners in the managed security services space, and a variety of companies in manufacturing, entertainment, and so on. And so one of the things that we believe in is making our product really easy to use. Just doing a quick time check. Um, and so if you want,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks, Ned, appreciate that. Um, if you want to try this today, right? You don't have to talk to anybody, right? You can just go to sandbox.cribl.io and you can start using it. You can start use it's a guided walkthrough of how you would use the product. And we also offer a free cloud tier. You can do up to 1 terabyte a day of ingest and egress through that cloud account. And so I use this all the time to test out new products and play with things. So we've made it incredibly easy for you to experiment and use, for your teams to experiment with and use. And you can also join our community as well if you're interested at cribl.io/community. So that's what I've got, and I'm happy to take any questions. Ned, are there any questions? I'm just looking at my presentation.
No, sir, there aren't. But I'd love if you, I do have one. One of the things that's been a theme both today and in general when we talk to our customers is a reorientation towards business outcomes. And I'd love to hear, we didn't talk about that too much during your presentation. And so since we have a couple minutes, I wanted to give you an opportunity to think about what should our customers who are owning a project think about when they think about observability. I have my own opinions, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, observability is it's how you figure out what you should be monitoring, right? I know there's a lot of confusion, right? There's an identity crisis, I think, with observability, and you see it when you see comments like, I need better observability, I need better alerts. Well, that's not observability, that's monitoring, because you know what you want to be alerted on. But being able to uncover what the next question is, right? Think about observability as your question development environment, right? What is the reason this application stopped performing like it should have? Why are orders being rejected in one region and not another, right? Those are the types of questions that observability, right, with this mountain of data, well organized, right, that you can ingest into via the pipeline. Those are the types of questions that observability helps you answer. And so as these products become much more important to the business, right, and they drive much more revenue, you're going to have to be able to answer those questions to keep revenue flowing, keep your customers happy, keep those brand touch points strong. Ned, did I answer your question? I'm not sure if I did.
I think so. It's almost like you're saying that that as the IT infrastructure has become more critical to the services that we deliver, then there's been a corresponding increase in the number of things that we can look at, but we don't necessarily need to look at everything, because if we have 8 or 10 or 30 or 50 different tools, we're going to get much of the same information, just in different formats. And so what you're, I think, describing through observability is saying, look, let's take the 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever percent of the data that's produced and get the ones that are impactful to our ultimate outcome. And that's what you're driving towards. And that's why we value the product at EVOTEK for our customers. Is that a fair summary? And that's what
absolutely. And it looks different for everyone. For some companies, it's let's focus on the 10% most valuable data. For others, it's I want to be able to use 100% of the data, but I can't put it into those destination systems. So it depends, right? I mean, not a great answer, but it depends on what your desired outcomes are. No two companies are the same. And also the impact on the security side as well, right? Being able to get better signal through all the noise is a big challenge for security teams. And so being able to make better decisions on that data is critical today. We actually see the observability story has been very focused on developers, but we actually think most of the benefits accrue to operations.
Yeah, we do too. So thank you, Nick. I was smiling only because I've never heard "it depends" before in the IT space. That's the first time. So
right.
Thank you very much. So everybody, that concludes our session. Thank you again, Nick, for joining us today. Please join us again on the stage, and we will have our last session. Have a good day, and thank you again, Nick. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.